so happy. 환영합니다. Thank you. This is a very exciting, very special experience for me. I have given this presentation in more countries than I can count now, all around the world, and it's my first time in Korea. And I gave one lecture in Malaysia years ago, so it's my first time in Asia in some ways too. And I'm very excited to see so many people out here, so thank you for coming out. I want to make just one quick correction. We ask for no unauthorized filming, but photos are fine if you'd like to take photos. So before we get started, I wanted to just ask, have you had a chance to look at some of these slides that I had looping around before? Yes? Aren't they lovely? Whenever I give this presentation, I like to begin by talking about how whenever I make new slides, it always takes me so long to find just the right images that really convey what I'm trying to communicate. But not when it comes to images depicting the natural connection so many of us have with animals. I mean, there are literally thousands of pictures out there that really capture that childlike sense of wonder, that understanding, that caring. So because I'll be referring to this human-animal connection throughout this presentation, I'd like to do a brief exercise with you to explore it a bit more fully. I'd like you to try to think of one or more animals in your life who you have felt a connection to. And by connection, I mean anything from identifying with an animal or animals to loving them. I simply mean caring about their well-being. So maybe it was a horse you rode on, or a guinea pig you had as a pet. Maybe it was a dog you grew up with, or a hurt bird you rescued, or maybe it was a fish or a turtle. Now I want to take a poll. Raise your hand if you were able to think of at least one animal. That was really easy. Okay, more than one animal. Okay, that was easy too. Well, now raise your hand if you have ever felt cared about or loved by an animal. That's a whole lot of caring. And our experience, many of your hands went up, and our experience tells us something important. We care about animals. We feel connected to them. We can see examples of this everywhere. We teach our children to be kind to animals. We make animals the heroes of our children's stories and the stars of our shows. When we see a deer through the trees, or dolphins leaping out of the ocean, or a delicate butterfly resting on a flower, we often feel that sense of awe that makes us just stop and speak in hushed voices and watch with what some might even call reverence. When we hear of an abused or mistreated animal, we recognize the injustice and we feel outraged. When we're at the zoo and the elephant chooses our hand, we feel special. We get excited. Can you relate to some of these feelings? Yes, I certainly can too. So I want to tell you a little bit about me and my story and how I came to be here today. This is a picture of me and my dog Fritz, a very long time ago now. Fritz was my first dog, and he was also my first friend. We did everything together. We played together, we napped together, and we even vomited together once during a sickening summer road trip. That's a true story. And Fritz was also my first heartbreak when he died at the age of 13 of liver cancer. And what I didn't realize back then was that Fritz would also be the catalyst for my life's work, which is to raise awareness of the psychological disconnection, the gap in our consciousness when it comes to our relationship with animals. Now, this gap has a profound impact on ourselves and our world. It causes us to act against our deepest values, and it is a foundation of global suffering. So becoming aware of this gap can empower us and can transform our world. Because when we become aware of this gap, we can make our food choices freely. Without awareness, there is no free choice. Now, to explain a little bit about this gap, I want to do a quick exercise with you. I'd like to imagine that you are a guest at a dinner party and your host serves you a dish that looks like this. Now, consider whether you'd find this delicious or disgusting. Okay, for those who would find it delicious, imagine that you find it so delicious that you ask your host for the recipe. And she replies, well, the secret is in the meat. You need to use 3 kilos of well-seasoned Shih Tzu. Okay, now take a moment to reflect on your thoughts and feelings. Chances are what you had just thought of as food, you now think of as a dead animal. What you just felt was delicious, you now feel is disgusting. Chances are your experience of the meat dramatically changed, even though nothing about the meat itself actually changed. So what changed? Well, what changed is your perception of the meat. Our perception is the lens that we look at the world through. And when it comes to eating animals, our perception is shaped largely, if not entirely, by our culture. In meat-eating cultures around the world, out of over 7 million animal species, people tend to classify only a small handful as edible. All the rest we learn to think of as inedible and disgusting. So even though the type of species consumed changes from culture to culture, members of all cultures tend to find their own choices to be rational, and the choices of other cultures to be disgusting and often offensive. So what's interesting is not the presence of disgust. Disgust is the norm. What's interesting is the absence of disgust, right? Why are we not disgusted by the animals we've learned to classify as edible? And perhaps even more importantly, why don't we ever ask why? Have you ever wondered why you might eat chicken's wings, but not swan's wings? Chopped beef, but not chopped rat? Fish soup, but not lizard soup? Hen's eggs, but not pigeon's eggs? Have you ever wondered why you might drink cow's milk, but not pig's milk? And have you ever wondered why you haven't wondered? When it comes to edible animals, there is a disconnect. We don't make the conscious connection between the meat on our plate and the living being it once was. For example, like many people, I grew up with a dog who I cared about, and I also grew up eating meat. And over the course of so many years and so many meals, I never thought about how strange it was that I could be petting my dog with one hand while I ate a pork chop with the other. A pork chop that had once been an animal who was at least as sentient and intelligent as my dog. To be honest, when I was eating the pork chop, I didn't actually think I was eating an animal. You know? So I just didn't connect the dots, right? I had that knowing without knowing. I had a gap in my consciousness. So where does this gap come from, and what are its consequences? It was half a lifetime before I started asking these questions. It was 1989, and I had recently woken up to find myself hospitalized after eating what would become my very last hamburger. A hamburger that was contaminated with a foodborne bacteria. Now, before I got sick, I was increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of eating meat. I mean, I had seen on several occasions information about the horrors of animal agriculture. And, you know, I knew on some level that eating animals was against my core values. Like most people, I cared about animals, and I didn't want them to suffer. Especially when that suffering was so intensive and so completely unnecessary. And yet I hadn't been ready to let that information into my life. So my response was always, don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal. But after I got sick, I never wanted to eat another hamburger or any meat again. And so I didn't. And then something interesting happened to me. When I stopped eating animals, I made the connection. I had a shift of consciousness, a paradigm shift. In other words, I didn't see different things. I saw the same things differently. Beef seemed no different than Shih Tzu to me. And so I became very curious as to how rational, caring people, just like myself, could just stop thinking when it came to eating animals. So I spent about 20 years looking for answers, including about a decade of research that culminated in my doctoral dissertation on the psychology of eating meat. And what I changed dramatically changed the way that I understood, and other people working in psychology understood, the issue of eating animals. Now, to share my findings with you, I want to start by talking about some words. So, I don't know if you're familiar with the word vegan here, but it's, some of you know, vegan is a pure vegetarian, right? So a vegetarian who doesn't eat meat or eggs or dairy. Vegetarian doesn't eat meat, but eats eggs and dairy. So, we have a word for vegan, the person who doesn't eat meat, eggs, or dairy, vegan, and a word for their belief system, which is veganism. We call somebody vegetarian if they follow the belief system vegetarianism. But in English, when somebody is not a vegan or vegetarian, we use some interesting words to describe them. Does anybody know the English words we use? Yeah. So omnivore, maybe you heard this before? Or some people say carnivore, right? Often people say meat eater. Maybe you heard this before. But let's talk about these words. An omnivore, by definition, is an animal, human or non-human, who can ingest both flesh and plant matter. And a carnivore is an animal who needs to ingest flesh in order to survive. So both of these words describe our biology, not our philosophy or ideology. Meat eater describes a behavior as though it's divorced from a belief system. This is why we don't call vegans plant eaters, because we recognize that the behavior of eating plants comes from a deeper ideology or belief system. We often assume that only vegans and vegetarians follow a belief system. But most of us don't learn to eat beef, but not rat, for example, because we don't have a belief system. When eating animals is not a necessity, then it is a choice. And choices always stem from beliefs. So, this is what I discovered. There is an invisible belief system or ideology that conditions us to eat certain animals. And I named this ideology Carnism. Carnism is essentially the opposite of veganism. Now, Carnism is a dominant ideology. That means it's invisible. It's woven through the very structure of society to shape norms, laws, beliefs, behaviors, etc. And Carnism is also a violent ideology. Meat cannot be procured without violence, and egg and dairy production cause extensive harm to animals. In fact, today, the egg and dairy industries are probably the most violent of all the meat industries. And dominant violent systems such as Carnism run counter to core human values. Values such as compassion, justice, and authenticity. So they need to use a set of defense mechanisms that distort our thoughts and numb our feelings so that we act against our values without fully realizing what we are doing. In other words, Carnism teaches us how not to feel. Now, the main defense of Carnism is denial, which is expressed through invisibility. The ideology itself remains invisible. If we don't name Carnism, we can't even think about it, so of course we can't question it. And Carnism also keeps its victims out of sight, and therefore conveniently out of public consciousness. For example, I'd like you to guess the answer to this, and I will give you some words to choose from. Okay, so 1.2 billion farmed animals are killed or slaughtered globally every... This, by the way, does not include any fish or aquatic life. This is only land animals, okay? So 1.2 billion farmed animals are slaughtered every year. Anybody think year? Every 6 months. What do you think? Every month? Every week? Mm-hmm. 1.2 billion farmed animals are slaughtered every week. So, in 1 week, more farmed animals are killed than the total number of people killed in all wars throughout history. But think about it. How many farmed animals have you seen? Just this week, this month. How many have you seen? So, I mean, where are they? Their body parts are everywhere. So where are they? Well, we don't see the animals whose bodies become our food because we're not supposed to. Approximately 98% of the meat, eggs, and dairy we eat come from animals who were raised in factory farms. These are windowless sheds in remote locations that are virtually impossible to obtain access to. Yet despite the fact that these animals are treated as commodities, they are in fact sentient, intelligent individuals. For example, pigs are actually as intelligent as 3-year-old children, human children. Cows are very social animals. They form lasting bonds with other cows and with their offspring. Chickens are known to be not only intelligent but also altruistic. They'll actually put their own lives at risk to save other chickens. And scientists have demonstrated that certain fish and crustaceans have pain receptors and are sentient, so that in some places in the world now, it's illegal to harm them, for example, to boil lobsters alive. Now, in a moment, I'm going to share a very short 2-minute video of animals in factories. And this video can be a little bit difficult to watch. But I want to just, my goal here is to raise awareness, right? So I have to make the invisible visible. Now, I tried to select material that would be sufficient to inform you without traumatizing you. So, but if you've seen this before, or if it's too much, just close your eyes and plug your ears. I will keep the volume low enough. And the translators will wait to translate this, and we'll summarize some of it at the very end.
Piglets are castrated by workers who cut into their skin and rip out their testicles. Next, the workers chop off their tail. Once pigs have reached market weight, they are sent to slaughter. At the slaughterhouse, pigs are knocked in the head with a steel rod, hung upside down, and have their throats slit. Improper stunning condemns many pigs to having their throats slit while they are fully conscious and suffering. Because male chicks don't lay eggs and do not grow quickly enough to be raised profitably for meat, they are killed within hours after hatching. The females have it even worse. Workers use a hot blade or laser to remove part of the chick's beaks. At the slaughter plant, the birds are dumped from their crates, then roughly snapped upside down into moving shackles by their fragile legs. They are then pulled across a blade which slices their throats, causing blood to pour from their necks. Calves on dairy farms are dragged away from their mothers and violently killed. The majority of today's dairy cows are confined on factory farms. Workers subject young cows to painful mutilations and amputations. Unreliable stunning practices at the slaughterhouse condemn many cattle to having their throats cut and their limbs hacked off while still alive and conscious. Massive trawling nets indiscriminately drag hundreds of tons of fish and other animals along the ocean floor. They are then tossed on board where the surviving fish either suffocate or are crushed to death.
Thank you. I know it can be very difficult to watch that. I'll give the translators a moment to just sum anything up and just give me the hands when you're finished. Okay. So, thank you. Before we move on, I want to just point out that the footage I showed you focuses on standard industry practices, so even in the organic facilities, this is the way it is for many animals. I also want to point out that I know this is painful to see, but there's a gift in our pain. Our pain is the mirror in which we can see the reflection of our humanity. So clearly the animals pay for our carnism, but animals are not the only victims of the system. Another set of invisible victims are meat packers and slaughterhouse workers who have to work in a highly dangerous, death-saturated environment and have been found to have high rates of post-traumatic stress and addictions. Conditions are similar all around the world. I will share with you just one example from the United States. In 2005, for the first time ever, Human Rights Watch, which is an international human rights organization, issued a report criticizing a single U.S. industry, for the meat industry, for working conditions so appalling they violate basic human rights. And our environment is an invisible victim of carnism. According to the United Nations, animal agriculture is actually one of the most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems in the world today. And we are the invisible victims of carnism. We pay for our carnism with our health, as eating animals has been connected with some of the most common and deadly diseases in the world today. Everything from heart disease, obesity, diabetes, and cancer. The Academy for Nutrition and Dietetics, which is one of the most renowned dietetic or nutritional institutions in the world, says that vegan diets are actually not only good for you, but they can help prevent and treat disease. So we pay for our carnism with our health, but we also pay for our carnism with our hearts and with our minds. We pay for our carnism with the gap in our consciousness. Now, we've talked a bit about invisibility, denial, the main defense of the system. But do you think that invisibility alone can maintain carnism? I mean, of course not. The truth surrounds us everywhere. I mean, animals' bodies are everywhere we turn. So when invisibility inevitably falters, we need to be able to justify eating animals. And the way that we learn to justify eating animals is by learning to believe that the myths of meat, eggs, and dairy are the facts of meat, eggs, and dairy. These myths are expressed largely through what I refer to as the 3 N's of justification. Eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. The 3 N's of justification. And of course, these same arguments have been used to justify violent practices throughout history. Slavery is normal, natural, and necessary. Male dominance is normal, natural, and necessary. You can find many examples of this. Now, a related myth is the protein myth, that we need to eat animals in order to get enough protein to be strong. Have you heard this myth here in Korea? Yes, around many places around the world. We now have much scientific evidence demonstrating that this is a myth, and that plant protein is actually better for your body than animal protein. And in fact, did you know that you could be strong enough to lift a car, even if you have never eaten animal protein in your life? It's true. But the myths of meat prevail despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And they prevail largely because carnism is institutionalized. Sorry, I put an extra slide in thinking I had more time, so we'll stop at this. These are just some examples of vegan athletes. In the United States, it's becoming more and more popular, and in Europe, it's becoming very popular for a lot of famous athletes now are becoming vegan only to enhance athletic performance. So carnism, as I was saying, it's institutionalized. What that means is that it is embraced and maintained by all of the major social institutions, from the family to the state. So carnistic bias is built right into the very foundations of society. When we study nutrition, for example, we actually study carnistic nutrition. And when we are born into an institutionalized system, such as carnism, we inevitably internalize that system. In other words, we learn to look at the world through the lens of carnism. And carnism uses a set of defenses that distort our perceptions of meat, eggs, dairy, and the animals we eat, so that we can feel comfortable enough to consume them. For example, carnism teaches us to see animals as abstractions, as lacking any individuality or personality of their own. A pig is a pig, and all pigs are the same. And as with other victims of violent ideologies, we give them numbers rather than names. And when we look at the world through the lens of Carnism, we fail to see the absurdities of the system. Voltaire was right. If we believe absurdities, we shall commit atrocities. And Carnism is but one of the many atrocities, one of the many violent ideologies that are an unfortunate part of the human legacy. And although the experience of each set of victims will always be somewhat unique, the ideologies themselves are structurally similar, because the mentality that enables violence is the same. It's the mentality of domination and subjugation, of privilege and oppression. It's the mentality that causes us to turn someone into something, to reduce a life to a unit of production. It is the might makes right mentality that makes us feel entitled to wield complete control over the lives and deaths of those with less power, just because we can, and to feel justified in our actions because they're only savages, women, animals. It is the mentality of meat. And this is a quote here by Leo Tolstoy that says, "As long as there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields." So, eating animals is not simply a matter of personal ethics. It is the inevitable end result of a deeply entrenched oppressive system. Eating animals, therefore, is really a social justice issue. So, this brings us to the conclusion, to the final question. Knowing what we know about Carnism, what is the solution? Well, I want to address this question with another question for you. Why do you think that we use carnistic defenses in the first place? Okay, just think about it. Just think in your mind, think about it. Why do we deny and justify and turn animals into abstractions in our minds? What's the point? It takes a lot of energy, a lot of psychological gymnastics. The reason is because we care. We care about animals, we care about justice, and we care about the truth. And Carnism depends on our not caring, and the entire system is built on deception. So the good news is that Carnism is a house of cards. It's a weak system that needs a strong fortress to protect itself from its very own proponents, us. So our caring is what makes us want to turn away from the truth. But our caring is also what gives us the courage to face the truth. It gives us the courage to, as we say in English, bear witness. Bearing witness means being willing to see the truth with our eyes and minds, but also with our hearts. When we bear witness, we reconnect with our natural empathy. We close the gap in our consciousness. So when we make choices that impact somebody else, we ask ourselves, what would he or she ask me to do? So the good news is that there is an alternative to Carnism. The vegan movement and the vegetarian movement is actually one of the fastest growing social justice movements in the world today. I have been giving this presentation, as I told you, in many, many countries, and everywhere I go, people are waking up and they're saying no to Carnism, and they're coming together and they're forcing governments and society to change. And there's reason to be very, very hopeful. And the good news is also that we can make minor changes that will have a major impact. For example, we can reduce and ultimately eliminate our consumption of meat, eggs, and dairy. Even if we just eat vegetarian one day a week or one meal a day to start, reducing makes a difference. We can use our personal lives and our professions to challenge carnistic bias that is out there in the world. And of course, we can spread Carnism awareness, which we'll talk about a little bit later. My organization is working on ways to do this. When more people become aware of Carnism, enough people become aware of Carnism, we can create a global paradigm shift in the way we think and talk about the issue of eating animals. So, coming full circle, back to Fritz, as you may recall, my first dog, who I said was also my first friend, was in many ways also my first teacher. Fritz taught me that to respect someone is to respect that no matter how different from us they are, they have a life that matters to them. Fritz taught me to be a witness. He taught me that love is a verb. And so this is why the goal of my life's work is to raise awareness of Carnism. Because for better or worse, we are all participants in the system. So our choice is not whether we participate, but rather how we participate. And with awareness, we can choose to be active witnesses rather than passive bystanders. With awareness, we can lead more authentic and freely chosen lives. And then we can truly become, as Gandhi said, the change that we wish to see. 감사합니다. Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we shift, I want to just say thank you. I want to thank Kara for hosting this talk. I want to say a special thanks to my publisher, Ms. Young A. Park, and to our translator, Ms. I can't pronounce, Soon Ok No, for helping get my book out there into the world. So thank you all so much. Thank you. And I also want to say there will be information. There is a wonderful new film called The Omnivorous Family's Dilemma. It's a Korean film, a Korean movie, and they will have information they're passing out about it today. Later on, you have information to share with people, right? And the director, Ms. Hwang Yong, is here with us, and I encourage you to see this film. I found it very powerful. So, okay. Thank you, everyone.